minutes away from 10 o'clock. As you head out for a coffee, that smashed avo, takeaway fish or chips, perhaps a fancy dinner, do you notice the people who served you? More often than not, it's someone from the younger generation. So in 2020, when you haven't been able to head out for that meal, what has that meant for those in the hospitality industry and those that work in it? Well, it's something that the Newcastle Youth Studies Network has taken a closer look at this year, and they've just released their findings. Dr. Julia Cook is here to tell you about it. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Hey, why did you want to take a look at hospitality workers and their experiences, not just this year, but as a whole in that industry?
So in general, I can start off by saying this year we noticed right at the start of the lockdowns in April of this year that a lot of the news discussion was around the risk of the pandemic to older generations. Of course, as it should be, that's a huge concern, but we noticed there wasn't really much discussion at that point in time about the impact of things slowing down and then finally shutting down on those that were most likely to lose their jobs, to lose shifts. And so we wanted to bring a bit of attention to the hospitality workers who essentially felt the pandemic very quickly, at least the economic impacts on their own lives, and are continuing to feel it in many spaces, especially Melbourne.
Why do you think there wasn't that focus initially, especially when we saw hospitality and retail kind of shut first?
Well, it's really difficult to say, but I would hazard a guess that at that particular point in time, we were so concerned about the kind of health implications of the pandemic. And the narrative at that time was that younger people are not as at risk. They're not going to have a terribly severe case unless they have comorbidities or corresponding conditions and such. So there wasn't really that much focus because I think at that time the focus was really on the health aspects, and this economic focus has really kind of come into the public conversation as things have progressed. So yeah, I really think it was that at that point in time.
What makes it hard to get this sort of personal data about the hospitality industry?
Well, I think it can really just take a bit of additional time. So, yeah,
and shift workers are busy.
Oh my God, definitely, yes. So, not wanting to make a virtue out of what was for them a very unfortunate situation, but one aspect of the pandemic and the shutdown was that many of them actually had some time to speak to us. So, yeah, we when they probably otherwise would have been working, they were talking to us.
Yeah.
So we found a silver lining in what was a very bad situation.
What sort of things were you asking the people who put their hand up to be part of this study?
Yeah, so we spoke to young people aged 18 to 30, hospitality workers who had lost shifts, lost income in Melbourne and in Newcastle. We spoke to them in kind of May to June of this year, right at the end of the kind of first shutdown, or the only shutdown for Newcastle, and we were really asking them about what happened as things started to shut down, what happened in their working lives, and how they were tracking now. So, how were they supporting themselves? What were their experiences trying to find sources of support? What were their day-to-day lives like at this particular point in time?
What did you find? What were they saying?
So we found all sorts of things, but I think the thing that was the most striking for me was really the impact that the pandemic had on the international students we spoke to. So we know that international students, those that are here on student visas, are quite represented in the hospitality industry, perhaps not as much in Newcastle, but very much in Melbourne. And so we ultimately found that the pandemic had a really devastating impact on them, mainly because they weren't able to access JobKeeper, JobSeeker. They were not eligible for any of these federal income support payments. So we found that they were doing it really tough. Some of them tried to get some support from their families overseas, but a lot of the time their families weren't working because they were also in lockdown. So wasn't really much help to be had. Some of them turned to friends here. Many of them turned to kind of informal networks that they found through Facebook pages, such as Filipinos in Melbourne, Indians in Melbourne, and some of them turned to the gig economy and mentioned how nervous they felt about doing, gig-based, like Uber Eats delivery work and coming into contact with a lot of people. And the most striking case that I came across was one young woman who was doing a drug trial for money because she had literally run out of money. So the international students were really, really doing it tough.
Did we find that for some of the Australian hospitality workers that they were able to access some of those government supports quite quickly?
Yeah, so definitely not quickly. That was one of the big issues they faced. So some of the people we spoke to were able to access JobKeeper, but they were in the absolute minority. So the Hospo Voice, the Hospitality Workers Union, has done a bit of research on this themselves, and they found that an estimated only about 30% of hospitality workers were even eligible for JobKeeper because of the nature of the industry. It's high casualisation, high turnover industry, and so many of the participants we spoke to were trying to or had access to the job seeker payment, and for many of them that took a long time to come through. So they had a bit of a stopgap, and some of them could turn to their families and get some help there, but for others they were really caught short.
Yeah. What were they saying, like, beyond COVID, about the vibe of hospitality as a whole and what their experience is like working in that industry?
So it was quite mixed. Many of them enjoyed the work that they do. They really liked the kind of social nature of it. They liked working in teams. But there was also quite a lot of discussion of the kind of lack of maybe regulation, or perhaps closer to the truth would be a lack of enforcement of the kind of protections and entitlements for staff. So things like ensuring that they were being paid the correct wages, having some certainty around their shifts, things like that. So the main kind of issue that many of them had with the hospitality industry really did seem to be the kind of ad hoc way in which it was arranged a lot of the time through. Like, for instance, that really came out when the pandemic hit. Instead of things being done in an orderly way, a lot of the workers found out that they'd lost their jobs through texts in a work WhatsApp group, or by getting a text message or a quick email from someone they worked with saying, like, no shit, we'll call you, don't call us.
Yeah. So that idea of not feeling like they're getting that communication or respect, I guess, in some of the situations.
Yeah, that was really the case in some of the situations. So the way that the workers were treated really seemed to depend on their pre-existing relationship with their employers. So if they were on really good terms with their employers, they, in some cases, had a bit of a better go of it. But if they were not on very friendly terms with their employer, if they hadn't been there that long, then they didn't fare particularly well. And I think as well the fact that they were young workers didn't really work in their favour much of the time. So one of our participants was telling us about a situation in which when the lockdown was starting, and the business he worked for was deciding who do we keep on as part of the skeleton crew. His employer essentially interviewed all of the workers about their financial commitments and decided who would keep working and who would lose their job on that basis. And you can imagine he's a young guy, he doesn't have a family, so he was really one of the first to be shown the door.
Yeah. Was there much talk about customers in this survey and that relationship between hospitality workers and customers?
Yeah, so there was a bit of discussion about, especially when we were talking to some of the participants when the lockdowns were ending in June, when things were starting to open up again, there was some concern about working in a high-touch industry, working around a lot of customers, trying to ensure customer compliance with the COVID regulations, so trying to ensure that people did leave their details, scan the QR code, that they were abiding by social distancing, all of those sorts of things, which, as is the case in many situations, it sounds as though most people were doing the right thing, but a minority of people, it did make things a little bit difficult at times.
Now that you have some of this data and that you've heard these personal stories, what happens next, Julia?
Well, we've written a report based on the research that we did with the hospitality workers, and in that report we've made a series of recommendations. We're currently publicising that report and trying to get it into the hands of the groups that can advocate for these young people. And yeah, I think that's our kind of concrete step that we're taking at the moment, and we'll continue to write this data up for some academic-facing publications as well. So really, it's all about communicating our findings at this point.
Yeah, and having that place for hospitality workers to continue to share their experiences and stories.
Definitely, yes. I think it's really, really important that we, take hospitality workers, especially young hospitality workers' experiences seriously. For many young people, hospitality is the first industry that they ever work in. This is their first contact with the world of work. So, I think it's incredibly important that we treat them right.
Julia, great to hear a little bit about what you and the team have done. Thank you for telling us about it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Dr. Julia Cook there, Senior Lecturer, School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Newcastle.